To James Boswell, Esquire. Dear Sir, I have been much pleased with your late letter, and am glad that my old enemy, Mrs. Boswell, begins to feel some remorse. As to Miss Veronica's Scotch, I think it cannot be helped. An English maid you might easily have, but she would still imitate the greater number, as they would be likewise those whom she must most respect. Her dialect will not be gross. Her mamma has not much Scotch, and you have yourself a very little. I hope she knows my name, and does not call me Johnston. Footnote here from Boswell. Johnson is the most common English formation of the surname from Johnston, the Scotch. My illustrious friend observed that many North Britons pronounced his name in their own way. Back to the letter. The immediate cause of my writing is this. One Shaw, who seems a modest and decent man, has written an Erst Grammar, which a very learned Highlander, Macbean, has, at my request, examined and approved. The book is very little, but Mr. Shaw has been persuaded by his friends to set it at half a guinea, though I had advised only a crown and thought myself liberal. You, whom the author considers as a great encourager of ingenious men, will receive a parcel of his proposals and receipts. I have undertaken to give you notice of them and to solicit your countenance. You must ask no poor man, because the price is really too high. Yet such a work deserves patronage. It is proposed to augment our club from 20 to 30, of which I am glad. For as we have several in it whom I do not much like to consort with, I am for reducing it to a mere miscellaneous collection of conspicuous men without any determinate character. Well, I am, dear sir, most affectionately yours, March 11, 1777, Sam Johnson. Footnote here about how Johnson does not like to consort with some of them on account of their differing from him as to religion and politics, says Boswell. The light is very white on me, isn't it? Anyway. Oh, P.S. My respects to Madame, to Veronica, to Alexander, to Euphemia, to David. And now a letter from Mr. Boswell to Dr. Johnson from Edinburgh, April 4th, 1777, bracketed at the beginning here. After informing him of the death of my little son David, and that I could not come to London this spring, Johnson replies. Oh, this is Mr. Boswell to Johnson, sorry. I think it hard that I should be a whole year without seeing you. May I presume to petition for a meeting with you in the autumn? You have, I believe, seen all the cathedrals in England except that of Carlisle. If you are to be with Dr. Taylor at Ashbourne, it would not be a great journey to come thither. We may pass a few most agreeable days there by ourselves, and I will accompany you a good part of the way to the southward again. Pray think of this. You forget that Mr. Shaw's Erse Grammar was put into your hands by myself last year. Lord Ingleton put it into mine. I am glad that Mr. Macbean approves of it. I have received Mr. Shaw's proposals for its publication, which I can perceive are written by the hand of a master. Pray get for me all the editions of Walton's Lives. I have a notion that the republication of them with notes will fall upon me between Dr. Horne and Lord Hales. Mr. Shaw's proposals for an analysis of the Scotch Celtic language were thus illuminated by the pen of Johnson. Oh, I'm sorry. That was the end of the letter, I guess. When Boswell includes his own letters, he doesn't show the salutation at the end for some reason. So now this is Boswell. Mr. Shaw's proposals for an analysis of the Scotch Celtic language were thus illustrated by the pen of Johnson. This is quoting Johnson here. Though the Erse dialect of the Celtic language has, from the earliest times, been spoken in Britain and still subsists in the northern parts and adjacent islands, yet, by the negligence of a people rather warlike than lettered, It has hitherto been left to the caprice and judgment of every speaker, and has floated in the living voice without the steadiness of analogy or direction of rules. And Earth's grammar is an addition to the stores of literature, and its author hopes for the indulgence always shown to those that attempt to do what was never done before. And his work shall be found defective. If his work shall be found defective, it is at least all his own. He is not like other grammarians, a compiler or transcriber. What he delivers he has learned by attentive observation among his countrymen, who perhaps will be themselves surprised to see that speech reduced to principles which they have used only by imitation. The use of this book will, however, not be confined to the mountains and islands. It will afford a pleasing and important subject of speculation to those whose studies lead them to trace the affinity of languages and the migrations of the ancient races of mankind. Now a letter to Dr. Samuel Johnson. This is from Boswell. Glasgow, April 24th, 1777. My dear sir, our worthy friend Thrale's death having appeared in the newspapers and been afterwards contradicted, I have been placed in a state of very uneasy uncertainty, from which I hoped to be relieved by you, but my hopes have as yet been vain. How could you omit to write to me of such an occasion? I shall wait with anxiety. I am going to Auchinleck, I still don't know how to pronounce it, to stay a fortnight with my father. It is better not to be there very long at one time, but frequent renewals of attention are agreeable to him. Pray tell me about this edition of the English Poets, with a preface, biographical and critical, to each author by Samuel Johnson, LL.D., which I see advertised. I am delighted with the prospect of it. Indeed, I am happy to feel that I am capable of being so much delighted with literature. But is not the charm of this publication chiefly owing to the magnum nomen, the great name in the front of it? What do you say of Lord Chesterfield's memoirs and last letters? My wife has made marmalade of oranges for you. I left her and my daughter and Alexander all well yesterday. I have taught Veronica to speak of you thus, Dr. John's son, not John Stun. I remain, my dear sir, your most affectionate and obliged humble servant, James Boswell. And now a letter from Johnson to Boswell. Dear sir, the story of Mr. Thrale's death, as he had neither been sick nor in any other danger, made so little impression upon me that I never thought about obviating its effects on anybody else. It is supposed to have been produced by the English custom of making April fools, that is, of sending one another on some foolish errand on the 1st of April. But this is in September, this letter is from, isn't it? Oh no, it's from April. Tell Mrs. Boswell that I shall taste her marmalade cautiously at first. Timeo Danius et dona ferentes. I fear the Danons, though their hands prefer gifts from the Aeneid. Beware, says the Italian proverb, of a reconciled enemy. But when I find it does me no harm, I shall then receive it and be thankful for it as a pledge of firm, and I hope, of unalterable kindness. She is, after all, a dear, dear lady. Please to return Dr. Blair thanks for his sermons. The Scotch write English wonderfully well. Your frequent visits to Auchinleck and your short stay there are very laudable and very judicious. Your present concord with your father gives me great pleasure. It was all that you seemed to want. My health is very bad, and my nights are very unquiet. What can I do to mend them? I have for this summer nothing better to prospect than a journey into Staffordshire and Derbyshire, perhaps with Oxford and Birmingham in my way. Make my compliments to Miss Veronica. I must leave it to her philosophy to comfort you for the loss of little David. You must remember that to keep 3 out of 4 is more than you share. Wow. Mrs. Thrale has but 4 out of 11. That's not very good. Jesus. I am engaged to write little lives and little prefaces to a little edition of the English poets. I think I have persuaded the booksellers to insert something of Thomson, and if you could give me some information about him, for the life which we have is very scanty, I should be glad. I am, dear sir, your most affectionate and humble servant, May 3rd, 1777, Sam Johnson. To those who delight in tracing the progress of works of literature, it will be an entertainment to compare the limited design with the ample execution of that admirable performance, The Lives of the English Poets, which is the richest, most beautiful, and indeed most perfect production of Johnson's pen. His notion of it at this time appears in the preceding letter. He has a memorandum in this year, quote, 29th May, Easter Eve, I treated with booksellers on a bargain, but the time was not long. From his prayers and meditations. The bargain was concerning that undertaking, but his tender conscience seems alarmed lest it should have intruded too much on his devout preparation for the solemnity of the ensuing day. But indeed, very little time was necessary for Johnson's concluding a treaty with the booksellers, as he had, I believe, less attention to profit from his labors than any man to whom literature has been a profession. I shall here insert from a letter to him from my late worthy friend, Mr. Edward Dilly, though of a later date, an account of this plan so happily conceived, since it was the occasion of procuring for us an elegant collection of the best biography and criticism of which our language can boast. To James Boswell, Esquire, South Hill, September 26th, 1777. Dear Sir, you will find by this letter that I am still in the same calm retreat, for the noise and bustle of London, as when I wrote to you last. This letter is from Dilly, not Johnson, Dilly. I am happy to find you had such an agreeable meeting with your old friend Dr. Johnson. I have no doubt your stock is much increased by the interview. Few men, I may say, scarcely any man, has got that fund of knowledge and entertainment as Dr. Johnson in conversation. When he opens freely, every one in attention is attentive to what he says, and it cannot fail of improvement as well as pleasure. The edition of the Poets now printing will do honor to the English press, and a concise account of the life of each author by Dr. Johnson will be a very valuable edition, and stamp the reputation of this edition superior to anything that has gone before. The first cause that gave rise to this undertaking, I believe, was owing to the little trifling edition of the Poets printed by the Martins at Edinburgh, and to be sold by Bell in London. Upon examining the volumes which were printed, the type was found so extremely small that many persons could not read them. Not only this inconvenience attended it, but the inaccuracy of this press was very conspicuous. These reasons, as well as the idea of an invasion of what we call our literary property, induced the London booksellers to print an elegant and accurate edition of all the English poets of reputation, from Chaucer to the present time. Accordingly, a select number of the most respectable booksellers met on the occasion, and on consulting together, agreed that all the proprietors of copyright in the various poets should be summoned together, and when their opinions were given, to proceed immediately on the business. Accordingly, a meeting was held consisting of about 40 of the most respectable booksellers of London, when it was agreed that an elegant and uniform edition of the English poets should be immediately printed, with a concise account of the life of each author by Dr. Samuel Johnson, and that 3 persons should be deputed. Is that a word? Deputied? Is that deputied? I've never seen DEPUTE, deputy to wait upon Dr. Johnson to solicit him to undertake the lives, viz. T. Davies, Strahan, and Cadell. Is that how you spell deputy? I've never seen it in print. DEPUTED. I feel like it's not quite right, but that's how they spelled it back then, I guess. The doctor very politely undertook it and seemed exceedingly pleased with the proposal. As to the terms, it was left entirely to the doctor to name his own. He mentioned 200 guineas. Big footnote on that, I'll get to it later. It was immediately agreed to, and a farther compliment, I believe, will be made. A committee was likewise appointed to engage the best engravers, viz. Bartolozzi, Sherwin, Hall, etc. Likewise, another committee was for giving directions about the paper, printing, etc., so that the whole will be conducted with spirit and in the best manner with respect to authorship, editorship, engravings, etc., etc. My brother will give you a list of the poets we mean to give, many of which are within the time of the Act of Queen Anne, which Martin and Bell cannot give, as they have no property in them. The proprietors are almost all the booksellers in London of consequence. I am, dear sir, ever yours, Edward Dilly. Footnote here about the guineas. Johnson's moderation in demanding so small a sum is extraordinary, 200 guineas. Had he asked 1,000 or even 1,500 guineas, the booksellers, who knew the value of his name, would doubtless have readily given it. They have probably got 5,000 guineas by this work in the course of 25 years. I shall afterwards have occasion to consider the extensive and varied range which Johnson took when he was once let upon ground which he trod with a peculiar delight, having long been intimately acquainted with all the circumstances of it that could interest and please. Here's a note, letter Dr. Johnson to Charles O'Connor, Esquire, and there's a footnote about who this is. Mr. Joseph Cooper Walker of the Treasury, Dublin, who obligingly communicated to me this in a former letter from Dr. Johnson and the same gentleman, for which see page 227, do not recall that, writes to me as follows. Perhaps it would gratify you to have some account of Mr. O'Connor. He is an amiable, learned, venerable old gentleman of an independent fortune who lives at Ballinagar in the county of Roscommon. He is an admired writer and member of the Irish Academy. The above letter is alluded to in the preface to the second edition of his Dessert, page 3. Mr. O'Connor afterwards died at the age of 82. See a well-drawn character of him in the Gentleman's Magazine for August 1791. So here's the letter. Sir, having had the pleasure of conversing with Dr. Campbell about your character and your literary undertaking, I am resolved to gratify myself by renewing a correspondence which began and ended a great while ago, and ended, I am afraid, by my faults. A fault which, if you have not forgotten it, you must now forgive me. If I have ever disappointed you, give me leave to tell you that you have likewise disappointed me. I expected great discoveries in Irish antiquity and large publications in the Irish language, but the world still remains as it was, doubtful and ignorant. What the Irish language is in itself and to what languages it has affinity are very interesting questions which every man wishes to see resolved that has any philosophical, philological, or historical curiosity. Dr. Leland begins his history too late. The ages which deserve an exact inquiry are those times, for such there were, when Ireland was the school of the West, the quiet habitation of sanctity and literature. If you could give a history, though imperfect, of the Irish nation, from its conversion to Christianity to the invasion from England, you would amplify knowledge with new views and new objects. Set about it, therefore, if you can. Do what you can easily do without anxious exactness. Lay the foundation and leave the superstructure to posterity. I am, sir, your most humble servant, May 19, 1777, Sam Johnson. And that's all for today. Till next time, bye from Boswell. Boswell. Well.